Why does God allow suffering? It is one of the hardest questions people ask. Pain can make a person wonder if God sees them, hears them, or even cares. But the Bible does not ignore suffering. It speaks directly into it. In the beginning, suffering was not God's design. Genesis 1:31 says God saw everything that he had made, and it was very good. The world began with order, life, and fellowship with God. But Genesis 3 shows that sin entered the world, and with sin came death, corruption, and sorrow. Romans 5:12 says that by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin. Romans 8:22 says the whole creation groans and travails in pain together until now. That means not every tragedy is God directly punishing someone. We live in a fallen world. Sickness, loss, injustice, and death are part of a creation that is not yet restored. John 9:3 reminds us that not every affliction should be explained as personal sin. But God is not absent in suffering. Romans 8:28 teaches that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. That verse does not mean everything that happens is good. Loss is not good. Betrayal is not good. Sickness, grief, and injustice are not good. But God is so sovereign that he can take even what is painful, broken, and unfair, and still work through it for his purpose. What the enemy means for destruction, God can turn into testimony. What feels like the end can become the place where faith is strengthened, character is formed, and dependence on God becomes deeper. The pain may not make sense in the moment, but Romans 8:28 reminds us that suffering is not beyond God's reach. Suffering can reveal what we are leaning on. Psalm 46:1 says God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Sometimes pain strips away false security and teaches us to depend on him. The Bible never says faithful people will never suffer. Job suffered in Job 1. Joseph was betrayed, yet Genesis 50:20 shows that God used evil for good. David walked through the valley of the shadow of death in Psalm 23:4. And in 2 Corinthians 12:9, Paul learned that God's strength is made perfect in weakness. Yet God can use suffering to shape endurance. James 1:2-4 says, "The trying of your faith works patience." Romans 5:3-5 says tribulation can produce patience, experience, and hope when our hearts remain turned toward God. Pain can also make us more compassionate. 2 Corinthians 1:3-4 calls God the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort, who comforts us, so we may comfort others in trouble. Most importantly, Jesus understands suffering. Isaiah 53:3 says he was despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. That means Jesus did not come into the world untouched by pain. He knew rejection, he knew loneliness, he knew betrayal, he knew what it felt like to be misunderstood, mocked, and hated without cause. Hebrews 4:15 says we do not have a high priest who cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities. In other words, Jesus is not distant from human suffering. He entered into it. He carried grief. He endured pain. He faced the cross. So when we suffer, we are not crying out to a God who has never felt sorrow. We are crying out to the one who understands suffering from the inside and still overcame it. So when you suffer, you are not praying to a God who is far away from pain. John 11:35 says Jesus wept at the tomb of Lazarus. He knows grief. He knows rejection. He knows what it means to suffer. But suffering will not have the final word. Revelation 21:4 says, God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying, nor shall there be any more pain. That is not just poetic comfort. That is the promise of God's final restoration. The pain we see now is temporary compared to what God has prepared. The sickness, the grief, the injustice, the loneliness, and the questions that feel unanswered will not last forever. Psalm 34:18 reminds us that the Lord is near to the brokenhearted, and Revelation 21:5 says, He will make all things new. So until that day comes, we do not pretend suffering is easy. We trust that God is present in it, faithful through it, and powerful enough to end it forever.